Welcome to another edition of Teach the Geek interviews. My name is Neil Thompson. I'm the founder of Teach the Geek. I work with technical professionals so they can present more effectively, especially in front of non-technical audiences. And you can learn more about that at teachthegeek.com. Again, that's teachthegeek.com. Today, my guest is Ruba Sarris Sawaya. She is a woman of many talents. It would seem that way based on all the types of jobs she's had. She's worked in government affairs, business development, and clinical affairs. So what propelled her to get into this line of work, and what she learned along the way, and how does public speaking figure into all of it? Well, let's find out. Welcome to Teach the Geek interviews.
Thank you very much, Neil. It's nice to be here.
Wonderful. So from the bit of research I did on you, I saw that you got your degree in biology, and I think you had a few minors as well. So what was the motivation to pursue that major?
So I majored in biology and double minored in physics and chemistry, and initially started out wanting to go pre-med. So that was the reason for the concentration in the major.
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah. I also had thought about going into medicine as well, but I went against it because I saw that at least the ones that work in hospitals, they don't get to sleep all that much, and I need my beauty sleep, so that was necessary. I also saw that you got a degree, a master's in public health. What was the motivation to get that degree?
I did with a focus on epidemiology. I was working in clinical research for medical device companies, and it brought a huge value in helping me do my job well and get a better understanding from a disease perspective of how these patients are impacted. So for me, that was the motivation between doing the master's, and did it concurrently while I was working, which was a little bit intense, but worth it.
Oh, wow. So did you take classes at night?
I did. I did a program through UT Houston School of Public Health while I was in Dallas, actually. So they had a partner program with UT Southwestern. So the classes were virtual and at night.
Oh,
Uh,
okay.
yeah.
Nice. I mean,
Yeah.
I mentioned there are various jobs that you've had. You haven't really stayed on one spot. So I was kind of curious, was that something that you planned on doing, or is that more something that kind of just came up?
It was not. It was something that evolved. I think the first time you and I spoke, I'd mentioned that I had a habit of raising my hand and wanting to help within companies that I worked for. And subsequently, whenever there were gaps or challenges, I'd step in and ended up taking on quite a bit of versatile jobs within each company that I was with. So with OrthoFix, I came in initially to manage clinical research for them, preclinical research. The clinical research director left, stepped in to support, and then ended up with that role permanently, and then transitioned in the same way across government affairs within the same organization. So it was not planned, Neil, but it was a subsequent result of a willingness to want to help within each organization.
That might be a bit intimidating, I figure, for some going into something perhaps that you didn't have any experience in previously. What did you do to get up to speed?
Well, I think two things from that perspective. One, I had a phenomenal support system, so a management team that believes in their employees and a willingness to help develop and foster was there. So I want to put that out there that it wasn't just due to motivation. You had a good team there that was willing to help me learn. And then two, a willingness to admit what I didn't know and get after it and learning. So I have a science background by default, and I love to learn. And so my ability to be successful within each role was just as much about the management team and the support I had as it was about willing to learn absolutely everything I could, taking on that new role in order to be successful.
I think for most people, when they move into industry out of school, they take a job as an individual contributor. I mean, who's going to trust someone just out of school to manage people? But at some point, many people move into that type of role when it comes to managing others. For yourself in your career journey, is that something that I guess when it comes to managing other people, is that something you always aspired to do, or is that again something that kind of happened?
No, and for me, I love to mentor and I like to watch people grow and develop. For me, the desire to want to move into management was along the lines of career progression, but there was always an interest for me in maintaining the ability to continue mentoring and supporting. So I've been helping people from a career development standpoint my whole life. Like literally, a lot of folks don't like their jobs or ended up in jobs that they never intended to do, and they're miserable. So that's something I've been doing for the last few years, where I help them with their resume, and I help them overhaul, and I help them with connections and networking. So I management, intentional from the perspective of career progression, but it's always been something that I'm pretty passionate about with respect to developing folks, helping people grow. I love it.
What traits do you think someone who wants to manage people should have?
Um, Empathy, good listening skills, authenticity, a willingness to be transparent even when it's difficult, and a willingness to listen, and be open-minded, uh, and manage bias as well. I think we all walk into a situation, especially in early management in our career, thinking that we have the answer and we can come in and firefight and solve all these problems. I think choosing to walk into a situation with an open mind and a willingness to listen, you end up getting a whole lot farther than coming in as a dictator.
Yeah, that's a great point. And actually it leads really nicely to I guess a follow-up question. When it comes to leading others, do you think a leader should have a leadership style or lead based on how others want to be led?
I think that there are different leadership styles, and I treat them like languages, and which one ends up getting used is very much dependent on the environment, the people, and the situation. And case in point, Neil, if you're, in the middle of a crisis within a company, the kind of leadership style that you end up using may be faster, more aggressive, because you're fighting a fire, than in a standard situation where everything is okay and where, operations are normal. So I think it depends is the answer from my perspective. There isn't one leadership style. I treat them like languages, and which one you implement very much is dependent on the situation and the environment, at least for me.
Got it. Also, when it comes to you being a leader of others, what's one thing that you didn't anticipate about having to lead others?
Um, how difficult it is not to get emotionally um, involved. Like managing that, you if you care about the folks that work for you and you're interested in their career development, when layoffs happen, when folks are having challenges, it wasn't the easiest thing to acclimate to that dynamic, right? Because you care about them and you want them to be successful. So that wasn't an easy thing for me to take on. Did not expect that reaction from myself, because generally I've had a pretty decent amount of self-control.
Wow, that's interesting you mentioned that, Ruba. Maybe a let's see, maybe a couple of months ago, maybe a month ago, I was at a networking event. I was speaking to this person about a LinkedIn post that I read about leaders. And it was written by a woman whose background is in therapy. And she said that leaders in companies, people who lead people, need to be able to help their subordinates with the personal issues that they're facing because they bring those personal issues to the workplace. And I just remember reading that thinking, I mean, how qualified are these leaders to even do that? They don't have a therapy background like the person who wrote the LinkedIn post. So what do you think about the idea of leaders of people within organizations helping their subordinates with their personal issues?
I think that it's a fine line that you have to be careful about. Um, I think it's a fine line that you have to manage very, very carefully. But to me, and Neil, I think there's a big difference between a willingness to listen and empathize and help folks find solutions. Like somebody is depressed and they're having personal issues at home, and getting them connected with a counselor via insurance and via HR. That's a big difference. That's very, very different than choosing to provide therapy for an individual yourself where you don't have the background or the experience. So to me, to leadership styles in your earlier question, mine tends to be very empathy driven. And I pay attention to where the team is and how everybody is doing what they do have going on, because it does directly impact the work that they have. And sincerely, you spend a lot of time at work, it does turn into a second family. So that dynamic of a willingness to serve as a supportive resource beyond just career development and the things that are tied to work objectives, I think you end up with stronger, more powerful, more engaged employees because of that. within reason. And again, it's being very careful that certain things are not appropriate, right? Somebody providing counseling directly versus somebody tying them to somebody who has the expertise is the way to go from that standpoint. But send me that article. I'm interested. I'm a big fan of that approach and that engagement style. I think it's awesome.
Okay. Another point I was when you were talking, Ruba, when it came to leaders, you mentioned empathy. What about the idea of leaders being vulnerable? I've read quite a bit about the importance of vulnerability in leaders. What do you think about that?
I think the same rule applies for me. I think within reason, and to me, you earn people's trust by sharing who you are and being vulnerable enough to share who you are. That resonates with folks, right? It's a personal connection that resonates, and I think it motivates in the same way as caring about what's going on in people's lives. It matters. I think you want to be careful, for me anyway, that the environment um, is still focused on the actual work, right? There's a balance between career development and engagement and building really strong personal relationships, and not transitioning that into a social scene where the work isn't being focused on as much because everybody is dealing with everybody's issues. Fair enough. So I'm all about vulnerability and in support of that, but I think in a way that keeps in mind the end goals tied to what we're trying to get done as an organization and as a team is really important. So sitting around in a circle, just being vulnerable and sharing personal details, I'll be very honest, I'm not a big fan of that dynamic. A dynamic that says, hey, I have a tough time communicating because I've had issues in my past, whether it's an abusive boss or et cetera. That's the vulnerability that you're sharing with the intent that it helps drive better communication within the team. Fair enough.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, when I first heard the idea of a leader being vulnerable, I thought to myself, well, I suppose it depends on what you're being vulnerable about.
Yeah.
I hear a lot about people talking about imposter syndrome and I guess not feeling that you're qualified for the position that you have. I suspect that if you're a leader of people, that's probably not something you want to share with your subordinates, that you're not sure whether you can lead them or not. It could very well be true and you're being vulnerable with them, but I mean, what are they supposed to do with that information?
Yeah, I don't, and again, what's the end goal there? So for me, I'm a big fan of honesty, empathy, and transparency, within context of keeping in mind what end goal are you trying to accomplish. So to your point, how is sharing that detail helping drive better performance, better engagement, better communication with the team? Now, I think the one exception to that, in my opinion, is if you have someone that you can clearly see has insecurity issues or confidence issues, putting somebody aside in a one-on-one dynamic and sharing that you deal with certain struggles, whether it's communication or public speaking, right? As another example, that's a different set, but I think it tends to be the exception, not the rule from my perspective. I agree with you on that one.
All right, cool.
Yeah.
When it also, I guess for the people who are listening or watching our conversation, Ruba, and they have aspirations to be a leader of people, what can they do to prepare to be one?
Um, I think honestly, for me, I'm a big reader. I think a lot of it comes through experience, but I also think that there's a world of knowledge out there for you to leverage. Harvard, Coursera does tons of stuff on leadership. LinkedIn has tons of courses on leadership. Half the books behind me have to do with strategy, leadership, team engagement. You want to be a good manager, just like you're a good engineer or you're a really good professional at your job. I treated it like just as an important that the core competencies involved were something that a lot that you could learn and that you could leverage from pre-existing information. So for me, the one piece of advice there is engage and learn and then ask for feedback. So I did, we do performance reviews when you start managing individuals. In the same way that I would set up performance reviews, I'd set up quarterly updates with the team with a set of questions, not on how I was doing, but on things that we could do to improve, and sidebars consequently that told me how I could do better. Does that make sense? So it's an so to me, just because you have been moved into a management position, we all have blind spots. The open, active engagement to seek feedback on how you're doing, colleagues, from people that are, above you, below you, and then lateral, is incredibly important to being a good leader.
Yeah, I think you're right about that, Ruba. And well, in it, what I guess, have you ever been in a position where you were to get that feedback from those people, but you were getting conflicting feedback? And if so, how would you deal with such an instance?
I think sometimes that I have had that happen, and I think where that's happened, it's a realization. Where that's happened, people tend to, we all have blind spots. Comment number one: how I came off in a meeting was not how I intended to come off. When something had happened, prior to me walking in, that had to do with a family situation, and I may have come off more aggressive than I intended, as an example. So you end up with people where you get really great feedback about communication and engagement and partnership, and then you've got a couple of instances where the exact opposite has happened. So that disconnect happens. To me, why, situational. Certain things happen where you come off a certain way, whereas with other groups and other partnerships, it's not. The engagement looks completely different.
Yeah.
Um,
I can certainly see that. I mean, certainly it's probably situation based. So
Well, I see it for what it's worth. I see that as an opportunity. So even again, where, because you've got this constant feedback loop, where that's happened, where something came off the wrong way, or there is a communication issue, and somebody's honest enough to communicate that because I'm reaching out asking for feedback. Those are phenomenal opportunities for continuous improvement, like of the relationship, of the engagement, of the partnership. So I never see that as a bad thing. Even when bad feedback is, even when it's not the feedback I may want to hear, I appreciate it because it creates an opportunity for me to bridge that connection with whoever's providing it. Fair enough.
when I think about conflicting feedback, I think of my time in Toastmasters. So for those of you all that don't know about Toastmasters, it's an international organization with chapters all over the world where you have an opportunity to practice your public speaking skills. And as part of Toastmaster meetings, there are evaluations. So you can give a prepared speech and then you'll have an evaluator basically evaluate your speech, tell you what you did well, what you can improve on. But you also have the opportunity for other people who are in the audience to provide, I suppose, a mini evaluation of your speech as well. And there were so many instances in which one person would say, I really enjoyed your eye contact. Another person would say, improve your eye contact. so, so then you're just like, well, what am I supposed to do with that? But ultimately, I suppose you got to run it through your own lens and to see what you think about the feedback, especially if you're getting that type of conflicting feedback.
Well, and ironically, with Toastmasters, there's a good chance that you were facing a certain direction and making phenomenal eye contact with one group, but just not circling enough to the rest of them. So, some of them weren't getting as much of your attention as the other half, but that's pretty funny.
Yeah, yeah. All right. So, Ruba, when I started this podcast, it was all about the public speaking journey of people with technical backgrounds, and it still is. I really do enjoy learning about people's career journeys as well. And then it's also about my own struggles, having to give presentations in front of others. Back when I worked in medical devices as a product development engineer, I had to give presentations on a monthly basis to senior decision makers. And those first few presentations were absolutely horrendous. I I didn't even know it was possible to be that bad. After the presentations, during the opportunity for them to ask questions, they'd often ask questions I thought I had answered during the presentation. But it was obvious that I didn't, because now I'm getting these questions. So when it comes to your journey in public speaking, has that always been something you've been good at? And if not, what'd you do to get better at it?
No, when I started out, I ran into the same issues that you did. And I honestly think part of it is you have a science background. We love to learn and we love to explain and we love to lay out how things work and how we got to the answer. And the higher you go up the management ladder and you're presenting to a C-suite, you're presenting to a board, it's recognizing that you need to learn to speak a different set of languages based on that audience. you're presenting at a scientific conference, the detail and the information looks very different than if you're pitching at a, if you're pitching for fundraising. So to me, I learned to the point that you made, in the same way, the very hard way with some horrible presentations, the importance of knowing your audience, learning their language, knowing what you're trying to accomplish and what their goals are, with the intent that you make progress in whatever goals you're trying to hit within that meeting. So it was not an easy lesson to learn, but I went through what you went through. How did I get better? I asked for feedback. Same thing on the courses and the learning. I paid myself to take some solid like presenting courses. I did Toastmasters. I made the investment in myself with the intent to get better. And then I asked for feedback on the decks, on the presentations, with phenomenal Marcom people that do that for a living, so that I could get better at building the right decks and telling the right story.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Ruba. Knowing your audience is probably the number one rule of presenting in front of others. In fact, I went to a conference last month, and it was engineering students, grad students and postdocs who were the majority of the presenters. And those presentations were absolutely horrendous. They were probably just as bad as when I first started giving presentations in front of management. A whole lot of reading of slides and not looking at people. And I would look around the audience to see what people were doing when these presentations were happening. And there were a lot of people on their phones, people on their laptops, some people falling asleep. Luckily, they weren't snoring. I just remember thinking, man, they're basically where I was. Hopefully, they get better at this, because especially if you're talking in front of non-technical people, you're going to lose them very quickly.
Well, that's why I appreciated the fact that you were doing this, because I think the willingness to engage and talk to folks that have been doing it for a long time, you're trying to help fix that situation. So kudos to you for that effort. I think it's awesome.
Thank you. When it comes to the presentations that you do, Ruba, do you have a process for putting them together? And if so, what is it?
So my process is pretty extensive, from the perspective that a lot of the time I am presenting either as part of a C-suite, or to a C-suite directly or up. And so for me, when I say take the time to know your audience, it's not just about, hey, it's management and they need the message in a clear, crisp, concise way. It's literally understanding, what the goals are for each individual on that team, right? There are dynamics in a room with respect to what everybody's trying to accomplish. And if your goal by the end of that presentation is to get buy-in and investment for a program, for a project, for changes to make the company more compliant with A, B, or C, it's really important to understand what everybody in that room is trying to accomplish, with the intent that you are aligning messaging for how you're presenting in a way that resonates with everybody in the room. So it's not just know your audience and know how to speak their language, further in understanding what their goals and objectives and incentives they're driven by, with the intent that you try to get as much alignment as possible by the end of that meeting.
Yeah, you're 100% right about that. What is people's motivations? Because if you address those, then they're way more likely to pay attention. So yeah, 100%.
And then process wise, I lay it out, like literally for me, my presentation style is very much to tell a story. And again, you tie in the incentives and the goals that I'm trying to accomplish, and then supporting information to back the 2 or 3 objectives within that presentation. I think the other mistake I see very often is people try to get too much done, right? What is your end? What you are presenting to a group of folks by the end of the presentation, what's the 1 or 2 things you want them to walk away with? We want them to walk away with alignment and agreement that we're going to spend X on Y. Don't try to get 10 things agreed on within the context of that meeting. You'll get a whole lot farther, in my opinion.
I fully agree with you. In fact, I often suggest, when people are putting their presentations together, to start with what those takeaways are, and work backwards, because then you're not going to have a whole bunch of these other points that don't lead to those takeaways. And if they don't lead that takeaway, then take it out.
Yeah. 100%. The other thing I apply is the so what factor. So when you build your deck, and this is good for folks like science people we tend to go the too much information route. You're looking at a deck and asking a question on the statements that you've made. Is there a so So what? Why is that piece of information important to the end goal that you're trying to accomplish with the intent that you take something this long into something a lot sharper and a lot cleaner?
Yeah, I think you're right about that too, Ruba. You're right. With the technical people, they try to want to know everything. So they figure everybody else wants to know everything. But no, not everyone else wants to know everything. They got, especially the higher ups, they got a whole lot to really take in to think about. So you got to be more high level with them. Please don't get in the weeds unless they ask you to get in the weeds. But they're likely not going to ask you to get in the weeds. So don't.
What appendix slides are for, I'm telling you, like that's the nice balance with folks when I've mentored a team too that's trying to get better with presenting. They have a love for knowledge. It hurts them to take that stuff out, but it stays in the appendix section with the intent that it's still being shared. It's just not a distraction for their presentation. And to your point, you get a question about it. You look very well prepared if you can pull that up immediately. So we just remove those into the appendix section.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great idea. Before presentations, do you get nervous? And if so, how do you deal with your nerves?
I definitely still get nervous, still get a little bit nauseous. I have the Calm app on my phone, actually. I'm a huge fan of meditation. So I'll clear, even with this presentation today with you, I cleared 20 minutes before we got on the call with the intent that I just, meditate a little bit before I get started. So that's worked and that's been an effective strategy for me. And then I visualize. Like in advance of us getting on the call, how I want to structure it, how I'm going to answer some of those questions so that I'm well prepared. And being well prepared, you tend to walk into things a little bit calmer where possible.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I mean, I'm a big fan of visualization as well. I often suggest it to people. I mean,
Yeah,
if you tell yourself you suck, you will. But if you tell
yeah.
yourself, I'm going to kill this presentation. I'm going to know the answers. I'm gonna be comfortable saying I don't know if I don't know the answers, but things are going to go the way I want them to go, and I'm going to equip myself well in this presentation. Then you're way more likely to do so. It's about having those positive thoughts. I fully agree with you.
Well, and I've been given credit for my ability to foresee, like when you do the visualization and you run through and you think about the different people in the room, especially the longer you work with them, you can, you get really good at figuring out what questions may come up. And so it's neat for me to do that in advance with the intent to prepare content so that if that question does come up, I've got it in the appendix. So the visualization piece has been really good for me from a career perspective and helping me do well and come off ultra prepared in some of these presentations.
Wonderful. Well, this has been
Yeah,
a great conversation, Ruba. Thank you so much for being a guest. How can people get in touch with you?
of course. So my email address is Ruba Sarris, RubaSaris at outlook.com. I'm glad to help anybody who's trying to get better with respect to career development. I also work on medical device consulting, so commercialization strategy, soup to nuts. So anybody who needs help or support from that standpoint, feel free to reach out.
Wonderful. Well, everyone, that marks the end of another edition of Teach the Geek interviews. My name is Neil Thompson. I'm the founder of Teach the Geek. I work with technical professionals so they can present more effectively, especially in front of non-technical audiences. And you can learn more about that at teachthegeek.com. Again, that's teachthegeek.com. Until next time, take care and stay safe. Thanks, Ruba.
Thank you very much, Neil. Have a good day. Bye bye.